Hello, everybody. Welcome to the inside of my brain. We usually use a different Zoom format for this, so I'm used to seeing all the people piling in, but Tara assures me there are people out there. So welcome uh, to Housing That Connects Us, how three municipalities are designing for social well-being. My name is Michelle Hoare. I am the project director for Hey Neighbour Collective, and I am just going to quickly start sharing my slides, and we will get rolling. All right. Tara, could you confirm for me that the slides are showing? Excellent. Wonderful. So, as I said, my name is Michelle Hoare. I'm the project director for Hey Neighbour Collective. And this webinar, we are very happy to have co-hosted by Happy Cities, who is a long-time core partner in the collective, and United Way BC. And this is the third in a series of three in the Housing That Connects Us series. So, oh, and of course, now my slides aren't going to advance. Oh, no, they will. I am joining today from the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And we would love it if everybody would add where they're joining from. I took a look at the registration list. It's pretty incredible. We had over 300 people register for this webinar. And you are here from all over Canada and beyond. I'll give a little shout out to some of the folks who sent many folks. So I'm seeing lots of folks from the city of Calgary, Peel region, Nova Scotia Health, Interior Health, Victoria. You're coming from all over, and it's really, really wonderful to see such a variety of people from so many different lands. So for those of you who don't know about Hey Neighbour Collective, we are a collective impact initiative that is all about building community, social connection, and resilience in multi-unit housing. Collective impact models bring together partner organizations around a shared purpose and a shared vision. So in that case, in our case, in 2019, a bunch of us came together around a concern about increasing loneliness and social isolation, and a curiosity about what we might do to mitigate that within the housing system. And so some of us are scaling up programs in existing multi-unit housing. Others are working with municipalities and other housing industry folks to shift policy so that new multi-unit housing is designed to be age-friendly and sociable. And that's really the crux of our conversation today, is how are cities trying to embed some of these high-level ambitions to be connected, to be friendly, to be healthy into land use and housing policy. So why does neighborly social connection matter? Well, if you're all here, you probably are sold to some degree on the importance of social connection. But we like to say that at the individual level, social connection grounds us in belonging and well-being. At the community level, it turns neighbors into networks of mutual care. And at the societal level, it actually functions as preventative, cost-effective infrastructure that reduces pressure on health and emergency systems. So social connection, as we discovered through the pandemic, through things like the West Coast heat dome and many other climate-related disasters and emergencies, that knowing your neighbor and having that trust together and that ability, that willingness to help each other and be there for each other, it can be life-saving. You know, it's not a nice to have. We are social animals, and we are built to be connected with each other. And our bodies react very, very poorly when we are chronically lonely or isolated. The negative physical health impacts are as significant as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So we think that this is a public health emergency that we need to be paying serious attention to. And we're very happy to work with, city planners who agree with that and who are looking at what they can do. So today we have an amazing array of speakers for you. My very close colleague and friend, Madeleine Hébert, who's the director of Happy Cities. Sherry Emmanuel, an urban planner with Happy Cities, who's working closely with Madeleine on this work. Shireen Chin, a social planner with the city of Port Moody. Melissa Pace, a planning assistant with the city of Burnaby, and Alana Whitman, a senior land use planner at the city of New Westminster. So all of these folks are kind of diving deep into how they can really think about this in terms of land use and housing policy. I wanted to just acknowledge some of the funders who make this work possible. So Plan H, Max Bell Foundation, and Walton's Trust. A big shout out to all three of those groups for supporting this work. So today's agenda, I'm not going to spend really much more time talking about Hey Neighbour, but we'll do a quick poll. Then I'll turn it over to Happy Cities. You'll hear from each of the planners. We'll have a half an hour at the end for discussion and Q&A. So the chat is open on Zoom, but also if you go to the little more button at the bottom right of your screen, you will see that there's also a Q&A function. So throughout all these talks, if you can start adding in your questions for speakers into that Q&A box, that would be ideal. It also allows for you to vote somebody else's question up if you really want to see that asked, and it helps our moderators understand what's really surfacing for people, so we can prioritize those for the Q&A. So with that, I will ask Tara to launch the poll. Okay, and there it is. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And Tara, in maybe 40 seconds or so, do you want to show the results of this? Yeah, okay, great. That was a quiet thumbs up from Tara. Excellent. So this is just a fun way for us to see, get a sense of who's actually showing up, right? It's always the registration list, which is very impressive, and then there's the hardcore folks who actually make it on the day. So thanks to you who are here. So maybe when it gets to like 80% or something like that, Tara, yeah? Where are we at now?
Yeah, almost there at 77.
Almost 77%. Okay, great. Excellent. Wonderful. All right, let's flash it up. Okay, look at that very, very diverse distribution. So we've got planners, architects, researchers, housing operators, housing developers, government folks, community nonprofits, and then lots of mystery attendees in the other category. So please feel free in the chat actually to tell us a little bit about yourselves. We tend to have really, really interesting chat sessions. So please feel free to introduce yourself and say a little bit about why you're here. And with that, I will turn it over to Madeline.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm so glad to be here today. So I'm going to share my screen. So this slide is really giving you an overview of our Housing That Connects Us work. So it's been going on in 4 phases. The first phase was really about working with the City of North Vancouver. So for a long time, they've had something called the Active Design Guideline Policy, which touched on a lot of the ideas around design for social connection. And we actually helped them evaluate what the impact of that policy had been over the 8 years at the time that it had been in place. So we actually went into some of the buildings that had been built using that policy to understand how residents were experiencing the common spaces, how they were using the spaces, and whether that policy had shifted the needle. And then we have been doing these kind of like learning events for several years, and we really wanted to see a model where we could dive deeper. So we were very grateful to have 6 local governments in the Lower Mainland join us for a learning cohort. So through this, we had 4 in-person workshops over a period of about 6 or 7 months. And the idea was to allow planners to talk to each other about what they're working on with this kind of focus of social connection and the goal of increasing social connection in multi-unit housing. And all of this kind of like post-occupancy work and policy work that we did with the groups led to our Building Social Connections toolkit, which I believe Ryan will drop in the chat. But yeah, please feel free to check out that toolkit. It really is kind of foundational to a lot of the work that we've been doing. But as you'll see today, diving even deeper, we wanted to see how we can apply these kind of broad learnings directly into the policies of different municipalities. So we have 3 of our very great partners here today to talk about the work that we've been doing together on increasing social connection. And just to say a little bit more about the toolkit, I won't go through all of it, but encourage you to look at it. It is actually like a pretty fun read. There's lots of images and photos in there. But what we really talk about is often we approach common space design or amenity space design as a checklist item. We find like through our post-occupancy studies and our conversations with architects and developers that there are so many great ways to achieve social connection through design. And the toolkit really looks at outcomes. So trying to get people to think intentionally about what they're proposing at the design level and then understanding how that might impact people's use downstream. So really thinking about how the spaces will work for different users, how they will adapt over time to encourage people. For example, we take kind of like a broad approach to aging in place, recognizing that we are all kind of aging in place and changing throughout our life course. So our accessibility needs might change, our family structures might change. We really want our housing to be able to adapt and be flexible to accommodate those over time. And then the importance of these kind of like little moments of social connection. And I always use this diagram. Maybe some of you have seen it before, but we kind of try to explain what we're talking about when we say connection between neighbors. So we are talking about a spectrum of different types of interactions. On the kind of left-hand side, on the number one, you have these kind of daily encounters. And I always use the example of a high-rise tower. So if you're parking underground and your fob only allows you to access your one floor and your unit, your chances of bumping into a neighbor are pretty slim. So you may bump into them in the elevator. That might be kind of like an awkward conversation because elevators are naturally an enclosed space and don't make us feel open and comfortable for social connection. But if you take, for example, a courtyard building where you're walking through the courtyard on a daily basis, you might bump into a bunch of different neighbors on your way home. And over time, those relationships can develop into friendships or someone to water your plants while you're away, or in the cases of really intentional communities that we have the privilege of studying, mutual support, which is what Michelle was talking about with the resilience piece. So maybe you're an older adult who can actually stay in your home for an extra several years because you have the support of neighbors. Or maybe you're a parent who is actually getting after school care or trading after school care with other parents in the building. So there are a lot of kind of benefits that we can get from building more of these intentional communities. And we recognize that design is really just one piece of the puzzle. So there are really a lot of different ways that municipalities can take action and local governments and health authorities, looking at existing buildings and kind of new buildings. So I mean, one of the key things that comes up in our research is kind of the link between affordability and long-term tenure. So if you can stay in your community for a long time, your chances of building those relationships are much stronger. So kind of retaining affordable housing. There's some really great initiatives right now around like housing acquisition in BC. So a way to kind of preserve affordable housing. We did a really great tour last week of a building in Coquitlam that was actually a retrofit of a seniors building. And they were able to maintain affordability even through the kind of energy retrofits and upgrades that they did. And then to the work that Hey Neighbour Collective does a lot, which is supporting programming and partnership innovations. And I know that two other webinars really focused on that. And then today we're really talking about new buildings. So what can we do for policies to encourage age-friendly sociable design and at the same time support or create the framework for programming and partnerships? So we're calling these three folks our finish liners. Of course, there is no finish line, but kind of an ongoing intention to build social connection into all of their policies. So you'll hear from them about the work that they've been doing, and they're at various stages of implementation. We have a lot of different tools that we've been using to try to kind of help understand A, like where are the opportunities, and then B, what we can kind of be doing. So this is just kind of a map of the process that we've developed, Sherry and I, to kind of help municipalities work through these ideas. So there's a lot of kind of understanding that happens at the beginning because you all have a unique set of policies that you're working within. There's lots of different plans and official community plans, development permit guidelines. All of these different documents are important to understand how are you addressing social connection. If you are already, what are the related topics like resilience or age-friendly or family-friendly? So in order to kind of evaluate this, we normally do a policy scan. And then we'll also do a review of development applications, for example, to see what are developers actually providing in their drawings. And then we can also do the post-occupancy evaluations. So in Burnaby's case, they really wanted to know how are these buildings operating and functioning. So we actually go into the buildings, and Sherry will talk a little bit more about the process for that. And then we kind of like find where the recommendations are based on what we've mapped and what we've learned. And then we try to find places to insert those into existing policies, working within existing work plans to say, you know, this is not something we want to add as more policy. Sometimes it's about even removing things that are barriers to design for social connection, for example, or making these very smart insertions into work that's already happening. And then the important one too that we'll talk about is how do you kind of track and measure this? Post-occupancy evaluations is one of the really good ways that we can do that. And again, the idea is that we're trying to create a feedback loop between doing policy actions and then seeing what actually gets built. And of course, that can be difficult because of development timelines and kind of resources to actually go back and evaluate what the impacts are. And pass it over to Sherry.
Yeah, so thanks, Madeline. I'm going to speak a bit on just some of those examples that Madeline spoke to. So we developed a framework to organize where social well-being can show up in policy, which we then use to conduct the policy mapping and analysis portion. The key thing that we noted is that social well-being does not just sit in one place. It can show up through policy language and process, neighborhood level planning, building level design, and programming, operations, stewardship. So we categorize them into these larger categories, and under each one of these, we have subcategories with a series of questions that we look to answer when we're doing our policy scans. And this is an example from that exercise. We go into like a policy mapping process to kind of understand, using that same framework, identifying where policies are. In terms of the mapping, we looked at kind of two main things. We look at the level of guidance each policy gives, from high-level direction to more detailed guidance. And then we look at the policy for each document and how, what potential there is for each document to kind of address social well-being and connection. We also looked at whether each document relates more to neighborhood, building, or programming and operations level, and kind of map them out on here. Which helps us show, you know, where social well-being is being addressed currently in documents, where there may be gaps, and where different policy tools may need to better align. Something important to just note here is that not every policy tool or document needs to do everything. So some are better for like setting overall vision or high-level guidance or direction, like an OCP at the top. Whereas others are better for giving more detailed design and implementation direction, like DPAs and design guidelines, for example. So POEs, post-occupancy evaluation studies, often policy shapes design and design shapes user experience, but user or resident experience in this instance doesn't always make it back into policy influence. So that missing link or missing feedback loop, as we like to call it, is a missed opportunity. So POEs can come in and kind of close that loop by showing how buildings are actually being performed and actually functioning after residents move in. It can help us answer questions like, are spaces being used? Are there any barriers for access, costs, booking spaces, safety, or comfort? And are spaces being supported? Our space is supporting, you know, like everyday interactions. So we conducted POEs as part of the work with the city of Burnaby, and we used them to kind of understand whether the policy and design intents are being achieved by the buildings themselves through engaging with residents, developers, property managers, caretakers, designers, and others to get that firsthand experience. Quickly going into like the DPA portions, there are many factors that kind of shape social well-being and connection, and DPAs can contribute to those. We're working with the city of New Westminster to kind of incorporate social well-being into their DPAs. DPAs can influence various things like, site layout and orientation, signage, lighting, wayfinding. So this is a good example of how we use an existing tool like DPAs, and which already have like the experience, the influence, and we try to fit in specific language around social well-being that can help foster that, rather than treating social well-being as a completely separate document. And then there are new policies and new guidelines, right? So the idea is to move from broad goals into clear design directions. So we worked with the city of Port Moody to develop the new social well-being design guidelines. You'll hear a little bit more about this one, but these are incentive-based and were recently updated to incorporate guidance on family and age-friendly homes. And rather than creating like separate set of guidelines, we decided to integrate them. And this approach kind of recognizes that social well-being, the needs kind of change throughout a person's life and should be considered throughout multiple lenses. So looking at across these kind of 7 categories helps us kind of incorporate how social connection, inclusion, belonging can be supported at different scales for different residents and at different points in their lives. And going forward, the overall goal is just to continue sharing tools, examples, and ways of working with municipalities. And it's important to note that these tools need to be adaptive, right? So every jurisdiction has a different policy context, development process, housing market, community context. So it's not about creating a one-size-fits-all approach. It's really about just helping municipalities understand where social well-being already fits, where there might be gaps, and how existing tools can be strengthened or new tools can be created. Please feel free to check out the toolkit and case study. I think it's also linked into the chat. And now it's time to head over to the planners. You'll hear from Melissa, Alana, and Shireen about how their cities are implementing social well-being and connection in their policies. I'll pass it on to Melissa.
And just quickly before you start, Melissa, Sherry, could you, for those on the call who are not all that conversant with local policy lingo, could you unpack what DPA means?
Yes, sorry. Development permit areas. So it's kind of a set of guidelines that different districts have to kind of follow based on zoning. And they cover a series of things from site layouts, building orientations, lighting, a bunch of different guidelines essentially that different buildings would have to fit into. You might hear a little bit more about that from New West, but yeah, sorry.
And a city could have a number of different DPAs in different areas of the city. Okay.
Yes, so you can have DPAs for like high-rise buildings, mid-rise buildings, low-rise buildings, etc. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Great question. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Just really quickly, can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. Okay. So the presentation that I'm going to be doing today is going to be focused on Burnaby's journey to strengthen social connections. I'll just quickly start by introducing myself. My name is Melissa Pace. I'm a planning assistant on the housing team here at Burnaby, and my team has been collaborating with the research team at Happy Cities to conduct some of the work that I'll be touching on today. So a quick overview of what I'll cover. I'll start with the Burnaby context, a quick introduction into Burnaby's housing evolution and housing forms to prime the presentation. And then I'll go into our policy framework with respect to social connectedness, essentially what we've done to date and what we're doing now with respect to enhancing or adding in policy touchpoints about social connectedness. And then I'll end with next steps, where we hope to land with some of the work that we're doing right now with our partners.
And Melissa, just a note that your slides are not up. So you'll need to share your slides.
Oh, sorry about that. They're up for me. That's so weird. Okay.
I think you might need to press share.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
I told you that we'd have some a little bit of lag time between these things.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. And can you put that on full screen?
Yep. Sorry, I guess it's not playing from my screen. I'll try again. Okay.
There's also a note from some of our listeners that I think your mic might be picking up your hair. I don't know if you could do anything about that, but I can hear you just fine. But there's a little bit of static coming from it.
Can you see
Just
the
to throw
presenter
you
view?
off. Yeah,
No
we're
worries.
good now. We're good now.
Okay, you can see the presenter view? Perfect. Okay. Okay, so jumping back into it, the Burnaby context. So to start off, for much of Burnaby's history, Burnaby was defined by single-family neighborhoods, much like a lot of suburban cities in North America. But in the past few years, it's changed quite rapidly. Burnaby saw a lot of densification in a short amount of time, particularly in our town centers, such as Edmonds, Metrotown, Lougheed, and Brentwood. And we essentially went from low-rise streetscapes to some of the tallest towers in the country. And with that came a significant shift in the type of housing that we're seeing now in Burnaby. So we have a lot more multi-unit buildings, more purpose-built rental towers, mixed use, as well as mixed tenure development. So buildings with both strata and rental. And the thing about densification is that it brings a lot of people together in one space, thousands and thousands of residents, but it doesn't automatically bring community. People can live stacked on top of each other in 20-story buildings, 50-story, 80-story buildings, but never know a single neighbor. So as dense urban living and multi-unit housing forms become the norm in Burnaby as well as many other suburban cities in North America, it's important that cities address the factors that contribute to healthy communities in this new reality. And one of the key pillars of healthy communities is social connection for residents. So going into the policy context, during the boom period, the city had to respond quite quickly. And so they created a housing needs assessment, which essentially helped Burnaby understand what was happening and what was needed with respect to facilitating these social needs along with the housing boom. So along with that work, there were a few key housing policies that were created. The first one is the rental use zoning policy. For those of you who are unaware, it had 4 pillars, but in essence, it essentially protected existing purpose-built rental stock, as well as secured new rental supply in new builds, which enabled the delivery of many more non-market housing units in our new builds over the past decade. The second was the tenant assistance policy, which essentially ensured that when redevelopment of purpose-built rental buildings happen, existing tenants are protected throughout the transition. And the most important one, the overarching roadmap that the Burnaby has used to guide housing policy has been our housing and homelessness strategy, or home strategy for short. It essentially identified actions to improve affordability, address homelessness, and create inclusive, livable neighborhoods over a 10-year period, that 10-year period being 2021 to 2031. And the home strategy includes about 90 actions, but one of these actions specifically focuses on building stronger communities by promoting connection and relationship building in multifamily buildings, with the idea that this work and this outcome could be achieved through guidelines for building design and amenities. So at the time, it was recognized as important work. But, as many municipalities can likely relate, just due to capacity and resource constraints, the work just never got off the ground until now. So giving a bit more of a background for where we're at today with respect to our policy framework, another foundational piece of our social connectedness work was a 4-workshop policy project completed with the Hey Neighbour Collective and Happy Cities in 2023 and 2024. So Burnaby participated in a peer learning series with Happy Cities and SFU, as well as other municipalities, to essentially co-create design policies that addressed well-being in multi-unit housing. And Burnaby was most involved in the second phase, which was the co-creation workshops, which focused on topics like social connection, housing for all, affordability, with each municipality developing its own policies. And the work culminated into a design toolkit that Madeline touched on briefly earlier. Some of you may be familiar. It was released in 2024. And throughout the process, each municipality, including Burnaby, was challenged to consider how to meaningfully apply the findings from these workshops into their own policy contexts over the short, medium, and long term. So fast forward a few years, and the planning landscape in Burnaby has continued to evolve. We've recently updated our official community plan. The update was just adopted by Council in December 2025. This year, we adopted a new zoning bylaw, and we've also created our form and character development permit guidelines, something we didn't previously have, and instead we relied on PPAs, which stands for preliminary plan approvals, to guide design and built form through the development approvals process. So these policy documents include high-level principles around social connectedness, community-oriented design, and creating spaces that bring people together. And the second piece was the standardization of requirements, which was essentially quick wins from our peer learning workshops applied to our existing policy context. So in Burnaby, at present, at the initial application stage, planners now use a checklist to complete a preliminary design review with consistent requirements focused on connectivity, continuity, and functionality of shared spaces in multi-unit buildings. And the design toolkit that was created in 2024 was an important reference document for this checklist, as well as informing some of our policy guidance in our OCP and our zoning bylaw rewrite that focuses on social connectedness. And the third part, which is the work we're doing now with Happy Cities and Hey Neighbour, just to give a background on some of this work, there was a funding call through BC Healthy Communities in 2025, and Burnaby applied in collaboration with our partners as well as the City of New West, and we were successful. And so that with that funding and funding from the Max Bell Foundation, we're now working on a couple of parallel streams of work that are aimed at strengthening our existing policy framework surrounding social connection, as well as potentially creating new policies in the future. So the first piece of this work, as Sherry touched on briefly, is a policy analysis. So it's systematically reviewing existing policy tools, gaps, and opportunities for how Burnaby can embed social connection into our existing planning and development frameworks. The second piece is a post-occupancy evaluation, which in essence was examining amenity spaces in recently completed buildings. We were aiming for buildings that were completed within the last 5 years to see how these spaces complement adjacent uses and identify gaps between how the design intent is matching up with how these spaces are actually being used. And the third one is reviewing design proposals, so in-stream evaluations of projects that are anywhere between second reading to under construction, to understand how amenities are being proposed in different types of buildings, consistencies, how they're designed, where they're located in the building. And with this work, we had focus group discussions with the design team, property managers, and in some cases, tenants of some of these buildings. And the intent with this work was to get as diverse a representation in our data as possible. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of different new types of buildings in Burnaby. We have mixed tenure, mixed use, And with that comes different setups in terms of amenities and building design, and how that impacts how tenants and residents access some of these spaces. So we got a really good representation in our data. And the last piece of this work was a focus group discussion with Burnaby development planners to understand what they've been requiring and how they would like the new policy to look in the future, as our development planners are the ones who really implement the policy and work with developers through the approvals process. So each of these streams of work has provided pretty valuable learning opportunities for our team. And just because of the stage of this project that we're in, I can't go into too much detail about the findings, but there were a lot of notable challenges that emerged throughout the process that I think are important to highlight, because they'll shape future policy development for Burnaby, and they may as well for other municipalities. So in particular, the post-occupancy evaluations and the in-stream design evaluations, they proved quite difficult in terms of securing developer buy-in. Many were hesitant to participate, likely due to concerns about contributing to what would likely be another regulatory requirement for them to factor into the timeline for development approvals, as well as another cost to their performance. And there were also some sensitivities around privacy and confidentiality of their development plans that they gave to us in this research project. And I'll note that it's an interesting time to do this work. Many developers are struggling to make their projects viable in this market. And so adding additional layers of requirements can, again, mean more time, more costs to projects that are already struggling to work. And, from a municipality perspective, we're conscious of not wanting to add time to the approvals process. As some of you may be aware, but the province of BC has recently enacted policies that are intended to streamline and quicken the development approvals process. So some of this work might prove to work in opposition to each other, which we anticipate might create some challenges when we get to the policy development phase. And so, as I mentioned, we haven't had direction to prioritize the work. Burnaby in particular has instead been focused on simplifying and streamlining our development approvals process. So yeah, it's a challenge that we anticipate in the future as we continue this work. But overall, the combination of the rigorous research and the real-world evaluation has helped service some key gaps and areas for improvement, which we think positions us well to develop more informed policy in the future.
Melissa, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to have to cut you off so that we can go to the next speakers.
No worries. Okay.
So why don't you hold some of the next steps material, because it might come up in the Q&A.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
No
All
worries.
Right, thank you. Okay. All righty.
Should I just jump right in?
Yeah. Please do. All right. On the first try. Way to go.
Okay. There we go. So good morning. My name is Alana Whitman, and I am a senior land use planner at the City of New West. And I've been invited here today to tell you a little bit about our project we're doing with the Housing That Connects Us on integrating social well-being within our multi-unit development permit area guidelines, which I might call DPAs. So that's your heads up. And I'll tell you a little bit more.
We all know what they are now, so it's good.
So just to give you a little more context on how we came to be in this place of working with Hey Neighbour Collective and Happy Cities. As most of you know, in 2023, the province came out with a lot of new housing legislation that landed pretty hard on the municipalities that have a lot of SkyTrain stations or rapid transit in the municipalities. As you can see from the map I included here, New West has 5 train stations, SkyTrain stations, which means a significant portion of the municipality now enables higher residential and multi-unit developments than we had anticipated in the past. So the green is tier 1, the pink is tier 2, and the blue is tier 3. So those enable anything from 8 to 20 plus stories in essentially an 800-meter ring around a train station. So that is a lot more density than the city was planning. And since then, we've had to do a lot of work to update our OCP, our official community plan, as well as some of our other policies in order to enable this density that the Provincial Transit-Oriented Development Area Bill brought. In the middle of all this work, our team was partway through a multi-year program to create a new vision for the area around 22nd SkyTrain Station. So I included that map there, and it is the train station furthest to the left at the edge of Burnaby. And so when this legislation landed, we went from planning a very small transit-oriented community, which was going to have more amenities. We're planning for a grocery store, more public space, more pedestrian realm. And we had to expand that to be the entire TOA, the transit-oriented area. And so we had to pivot and really think about how this legislation lands in an area that is predominantly single-family homes around a SkyTrain station. And that vision was endorsed in 2024 in December. And now our team is working on implementing the vision through detailed technical design and work with updating our policies. So I won't go through all this, but the work we're doing with Happy Cities really lands on this second pillar, which is design guidelines, which has to do with our development permit areas for mid-rise and our transit village, but relates to a lot of the other work we're doing for this TOA. So to give you an overview of the work we're doing with Happy Cities and Hey Neighbour, we did a lot of the work that Burnaby just outlined. We did a policy scan. We looked at our currently approved and in-stream applications to see how we're doing. And then right now we're in this final stage, which is developing new development permit areas. So to give you an overview, this is a summary of our policy scan. This gave us an opportunity to not only look at our DPAs, but also our other policies and regulations and guidelines that have the opportunity to really promote social well-being and sociability within policy to create neighborhoods that keep people connected. So this gave us an opportunity to figure out how are we doing and where is there room for improvement, and how can we be more intentional with how we write new policies and how we amend our existing policies. And what we learned is in some of our policies, we are quite explicit on how it would address social well-being. Some were implicit and some we didn't address this topic at all. And as you can see here, the official community plan and the work we're doing on the 22nd Street vision really has the opportunity to provide a high level of guidance and a high level of potential to address social well-being with our new builds. So next, we worked with Happy Cities to use the Happy Homes auditing tool to review some of our in-stream applications and some recently approved developments to determine how well they did at addressing social well-being. And that was based at looking at the criteria in the social well-being toolkit. The primary things we looked at were social building edges. So how are the transition zones and entrances and publicly accessible places around our multi-unit buildings? How did we excel in creating good social circulation? Are the lobbies and corridors, nooks and stairs well connected to encourage people to bump into each other and to make relationships? Did the social amenities, such as the indoor and outdoor amenities, bike spaces, things like that, did that meet the criteria in the social well-being toolkit? And then we also looked at the floor plans and noted if they aligned or didn't align with the recommendations and best practices. And with this understanding of how our DPAs, our development permit areas, and our other policies are actually landing within applications. We identified areas for how we could improve our existing DPAs, but also how to write better ones. And with that, that's how we got to where we are now. And we are looking at our existing development permit areas, and then also creating 3 new DPAs. And Madeline and her team are really helping us with this. So as I mentioned, when the housing legislation dropped, New West wasn't really ready to build mid-rise. And for us, that means buildings approximately between 7 and 12 or 13 stories. That built form doesn't really exist in the city and hasn't been built in several decades. So we don't have any design guidelines, form and character guidelines to address this. And we're also doing all this work on 22nd Street with our vision improved. And we are looking at how can we write this new multi-use development permit area that really responds to creating a socially connected, transit-oriented development community with high expectations on amenity, public realm, climate change, and climate-resistant buildings within the DPA framework. So we're partway through this right now. And just so that you understand how big of an impact this is on the city, this is a map of where these new development permit areas will land. The dark blue is the mid-rise development permit areas. And then the light teal color is where we have the area specific 22nd Street Transit Village development permit. That's going to have a lot of really specific parameters around a high rise, probably up to 35, 40 story community. And so we're midway through creating these new development permit areas. And so what you see here, we're looking at precedent, we're workshopping. We've had Happy Cities and Hey Neighbour come to workshops we're doing with an architectural firm that's helping us think about how can we take our new and existing DPAs and make sure we're writing them through the lens of social well-being. Some of the challenges we're experiencing is the Local Government Act. So development permit areas are really have specific boundaries of what we can do within them. And these form and character guidelines really are limited to the exterior elements of a building, such as facades, building entrances, materials, landscaping, all within the property line. And our team hasn't really succeeded in the past in bringing social well-being into those elements of the building. So through these guidelines. So working with Happy Cities and Hey Neighbour has given us the opportunity to reimagine what success through these guidelines could look like. So I have listed here some of the sections of our typical design guidelines through our DPAs and how we can intentionally infuse social well-being and sociability into these different sections. So making this an explicit principle so that not only are developers thinking about how they can bring social well-being and sociability into the exterior and landscaping portions that the DPA defines, but making sure they're thinking about that for the interior in a way that we can do within this framework. We're looking at
Alana, I'm just going to give you a quick heads up if you can keep the rest of your presentations to 2 minutes so we can stay on schedule.
I have one more slide after.
Yeah. Amazing, thank you.
Yeah. We're looking at how we can better connect our multi-unit buildings with the public realm, especially because we know in areas such as the 22nd Street Station where we're looking at big public realm improvements, new parks, new mid-block connections, and so we want these buildings to respond to that. We're looking at courtyard buildings in a way we never have in the past, and really understanding how promoting that type of building, massing falling on a property, can create better social connections, shared space, and outdoor space, which we know people are really craving in cities these days, and how to better activate the edges of these buildings. So next steps for us, we have to finish writing the development permit area guidelines. We're partway through. And that also will include going to different groups, such as the age-friendly implementation group that the city works with. We're also working with First Nations, and we'll be inviting the Healthcare Authority to participate. We're working with Happy Cities to make sure that we have targeted recommendations for our existing guidelines, as well as they'll continue to be engaged in reviewing the draft guidelines for our mid-rise and 22nd Street Transit Village. And then this work has also really showed us that we need to take this lens and apply it, for example, for me, to the rest of our 22nd Street work. So we're about to start streetscape and public realm design guidelines. And then we're creating development concepts, which will all eventually lead to a new official community plan amendment that has area-specific policies where we can really make sure that we're bringing all of this work together in our OCP. And with that, I think I just hit 12 minutes, so I'll end my presentation there.
Thank you so much, Alana, and over to you now, Shireen. And Alana, you'll have to stop sharing your slides at the moment we can see your calendar. Not in detail.
All right, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see my slides and hear me as well. Let me turn my camera on. So just a bit of introduction. Hi, my name is Shireen Chin, and I'm one of the social planners in the Policy Planning Division of Port Moody. For those of you that aren't familiar, Port Moody is one of the cities within Metro Vancouver region. We're one of the smaller ones with about just under 40,000 people. So we're a small little community. And I'm here to speak about social wellbeing design guidelines, which is an actual like a tool. So less looking at a DPA, but just a tool that can be applied to low, mid, and high rises. And so with that, I'll get started. Okay, so I'll quickly go through the background, the context, the actual tool itself, the social wellbeing design guidelines. So I'll touch on some items on implementation, and I'll get into the challenges and the lessons learned, and then what Port Moody is doing next. So that's my 12-minute presentation, 6 slides. Okay, so the background in Port Moody, community and social well-being is built into the OCP, the Port Moody 2050, and it's framed within Chapter 12, which is titled Community Wellbeing and Resilience. The policies support residents and community well-being, and it's closely tied to other plans, such as the city's disaster response plan, climate action plan, the age-friendly plan, and also the housing action plan, and which eventually leads into the social wellbeing design guidelines. So really, OCP has stated, community wellness, and it just filters into all the other plans the city has. For the context of how social wellbeing is framed in Port Moody, this project actually began back in 2021, and that's when council directed staff via the housing action plan to look at design guidelines. The project was supported by a Plan H community grant, and the original project was completed November 2023. It was actually working with Happy Cities that this original guidelines were developed. And then 2 years ago, in December 2024, the city, along with Happy Cities, undertook an update to the social wellbeing design guidelines to add a component for family and age-friendly design guidelines. So this new component fit in yet very neatly with the other design components that I'll touch on in my future slides. And this update was recently done, and it was recently done in April. So it's really fresh off the press. Okay, so the social wellbeing design guidelines are an incentive-based and voluntary point of entry for Port Moody to do this type of work. As directed by council, the guidelines set out goals for multifamily buildings to ensure the projects support the physical, mental, and social health of residents. You'll see on screen, there's 5 goals that provide direction for the guidelines. So quickly summarizing, they really speak to the health and well-being, community connectedness. They want to find ways to promote the various forms of wellness through physical, mental, and social, and finding ways to advance equity and support equity-seeking groups. And then also, which is the final one, is trying to find a way to integrate community wellbeing guidelines into existing regulatory tools to guide new developments. So that's this is where the guidelines come in. So as the incentive-based menu of guidelines, the purpose of the guidelines was to provide clarity to developers, city staff, as well as council on how to achieve well-being design elements in a city that's in a measurable manner. It was a way to encourage well-being as an integral part of development at Port Moody and recognize that well-being can be a part of multifamily developments. So it's not just limited to single family. So you see, it's really a toolkit for developers to use and for the city to measure against. All right, so some of the components or categories in the social wellbeing design guidelines include site layout and use, looking at also as well as prominent entrances and active transitions, purposeful parking, social circulation, shared amenity spaces, and the newly added family and age-friendly homes. So these are the categories. And there is also a chapter on best practices for programming and policy. And if you have a chance to look at the guidelines, you'll see how every single component has individual actions that can be applied to new multifamily developments. Here are some of the examples of the voluntary incentive-based items from the design guidelines that developers can review and hopefully include. So on the screen, I just have some screenshots for incentives available, and they are usually in the form of an FAR reduction or subtraction. So, or in the case of bike parking, a reduction of vehicle parking stalls for every 15 accessible bike stalls. So here you go. Yeah, looking at low-rise courtyards, bike storage, lobbies, and then the family-friendly. We're really trying to find a way to incentivize these aspects of design that can enable more social connectiveness in like a apartment building. In terms of implementation, the incentives that affect AFR reductions must be confirmed through the rezoning process prior to council's consideration of second reading or public hearing. FAR reduction incentives can't be applied at development permit stage. So they are something that's planned a bit more advanced. The incentives or bonus points that are tied to the city's sustainability report card may be considered at both the rezoning and development permit stage. And I'll bring some clarity to what these are in my next slide. So here you'll see some screenshots of Port Moody sustainability report card, as well as the social wellbeing design worksheets. And these are the documents that developers would submit to see what type of FAR incentives they could apply for, as well as bonus points. And this helps in an application review. Okay, so I'll talk about the challenges. So as incentive or voluntary based approach, it does allow for flexibility, but it can result in a minimal or no uptake in family and multifamily projects. We also we're unsure about if the incentives actually outweigh the cost for developers to achieve the goals, because they are ultimately voluntary. And at the city's perspective, we are trying to incentivize them. So a developer might not choose to do it if it doesn't, work out for them on the bottom line. The other challenge that we do have is that although these are the social wellbeing design guidelines are a voluntary menu of options, the city of Port Moody does have a family-friendly unit policy for unit sizes, so that's mandatory. So we have to work with policies that are mandatory and also voluntary guidelines as how to mesh those together. The other challenge, which we can't really control right now, it is the fact that we are in a down market. So that is that's just an overall challenge for all developments that we're facing. So hopefully it's unsure if these incentives are even that appealing at this time, given the current state of the market. So lessons learned, I guess we'll just really build off on some of the challenges. But in the down market, in this down market, we have shared this document with developers. So they're aware of what's out there, and hopefully that when the market is better, they'll be able to align their projects with these guidelines. But that is the reality of what we're facing. But the more applicable lessons learned, though, for folks looking to do something similar, it's to engage the developers and architects to obtain their feedback on which elements of the potential guidelines most resonate with them, and ensure that the guidelines and actual architectural practice align for ease of implementation. Because I think it's one thing for cities to come up with guidelines, but if they're disconnected with what's actually practical in the development world, it'll be even more challenging for cities to achieve their goals as well as developers. Another lessons learned is to engage with community. So the Port Moody has a community advisory committee, and we engage with them to understand what their lived experiences are for well-being and what their needs are. But one challenge that we faced is that we had expected to hear more from the family-friendly point of view, but what ended up happening is we heard more from the aging in place point of view, which is important. That's the purpose of the family and age-friendly design guidelines, but we missed out on potentially hearing more on family friendly if that was something that we were striving for. And finally, it's also important to include development planners in key points of the design process rather than just releasing these design guidelines to them at the end. That's one thing we learned from the first iteration of the guidelines to the second iteration is that we had checkpoints with development planners so they could see what was happening and also give their feedback from their point of view as developers that will help with projects move these forward. And looking forward, so the city is continually monitoring the uptake of these guidelines. Relatively, even the 2024 guidelines are young, and so we will note that after the adoption of the original 2024 guidelines, there were some projects that tried to retroactively obtain the incentives, which could be a sign of success because maybe they would have applied for these incentives if these incentives were provided in time. And at this point, there's one project that's in the pre-application phase that's considering the social being design guidelines. So it's getting out there. And like mentioned in my previous slide, developers are aware of these menu incentives. So hopefully more projects will take them up when the market gets better. As for the latest update, the uptake for the family and age-friendly design guidelines as of February, April of this year, we haven't had any uptake yet because it's a bit of a down market. And so with that is the end of my presentation. Hopefully I managed to make up some time from the other presentations and any questions you have. Thank you.
You did. Thank you, Shireen. Thank you very much for keeping it tight. I know you could have said more or gone a little longer, but this leaves us a good amount of time for some Q&A, and we do have some questions. Did want to just maybe lead with something that a few of you referenced, which is the fact that, yes, we are in a down market, as you said, Shireen. It is very hard to build any kind of residential housing right now. And so it can feel sometimes like, oh, does it make sense to be doing this work when it's already so hard to build? And when there's very little kind of new applications coming through because everybody's kind of waiting for the conditions to improve. But I think this is, in a way, maybe the perfect time to do it so that when things do kind of ease up, there's a new kind of enabling environment. And I think all of your efforts are really trying to make sure that you're not creating, a lot of new burden or time or cost. But I'm wondering, maybe Madeline and Sherry, if you want to say a little something about whether you think that this kind of design really does cost more, or whether that's more of a worry and a fallacy.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly things that can add cost to your project, but if you are really interested in a deep dive, we have a really great conversation from a previously recorded webinar with Robert Brown, who is kind of a bit of a financial wizard, I guess. But he has a spreadsheet where he kind of demonstrates the impact of different factors on your performa. So you'll see like interest rates, huge impact with a small shift in that. Things like parking, huge financial cost. When you start to tweak the design of the building itself, you actually like the impact is really small on units. And what we've actually learned through our post-occupancy studies is that the more expensive, larger amenity spaces are not necessarily the most successful. So that's why we're really trying to think of the outcome based and like finding ways to make your lobby a little bit more social or your circulation spaces a little bit more generous if you can afford to do that. But what are these kind of like small design tweaks that you can make early on in the process that at the end of the day won't add a ton of cost? One project that we are going to be doing a post-occupancy study on in the next few months is Vienna House. So Vienna House is kind of this special demonstration project between BC Housing and the City of Vancouver. So obviously a lot of kind of effort has been poured into that building as kind of like a learning case study. But one of the things that they decided to do early on is actually go with a courtyard model. And they actually used some of the fluid sociability software. So it actually is software that was developed by Human Studio and Fluid Architecture to actually model what happens inside of building with different forms. So they modeled kind of this like traditional bar building with a kind of double-loaded corridor, and they saw the number of interactions that were happening in the building. And then they also modeled the courtyard. And as you can imagine, like as I kind of explained with my example on the like scale of social connection, when you kind of create those courtyard forms or you kind of co-locate your amenities near the entrance, you kind of have much more touch points between residents. And again, those are things that don't add a ton of cost if you make the decisions early on. Yeah, so I would say it really is about looking at the quality and not saying, you know, we need to double the amount of amenity space that we're asking for in buildings, but really thinking about placing it within kind of a social ecosystem, which could include things like looking at your neighborhood and the social infrastructure that's around the building or the open spaces around your building, but really trying to think intentionally about how people are going to move through and interact and create those connections in your building.
That's great. Thank you. Tara, do you want to read out a first question? And maybe I'll also look at them and we can we won't get to all 12 questions. So we'll do our best. But let's get the first one, Tara.
Sounds good. I think we'll start with Jacqueline's question. So a lot of this presentation focused on new builds, but Jacqueline asks if there's opportunities to make existing buildings more community friendly, like policy updates, inexpensive upgrades, or even incentives, because doing this in existing buildings might be lower cost.
I'm happy to speak to
Go
it
for it,
unless someone
Madeline.
else wants
Yeah.
to jump in. Yeah. So I did mention this tour that we did in Coquitlam last week. So it's the LJC Christmas apartments, and a really interesting story. So it's a tower from the 1960s, which was originally built on land that the city donated to this organization who really had a mandate to create safe and affordable housing for seniors in Coquitlam. And the society was kind of facing, you know, decision points that many societies are facing right now with affordable buildings, which is many of your systems might be coming to end of life, or you may need significant investment or upgrades. And they were also facing challenges with thermal and temperature comfort, recognizing kind of these heat events where, you know, seniors living in unair conditioned spaces or spaces without good insulation actually becomes a significant liability and health and safety risk, and sometimes, you know, a life safety risk when we have, you know, people who are very vulnerable and in a really warm apartment during an event. So they were kind of trying to make the decision about whether to, you know, find a new site, redevelop a new site, or retrofit their building. I won't go into the whole details, but they were able to kind of pull together financing to retrofit the building with the residents in place. So it's a really interesting model where they were able to have some swing units and kind of move people as they did a phased retrofit, energy retrofit of the building. So now they will have significantly improved thermal comfort for residents within the building. The interesting part was that this building was built with so much amenity space that they were actually able to add I think 18 units into the design while they were doing the retrofit through a separate funding stream. And they still will have you know, a lot of social space left in the building. So again, it goes to say, like, they were able to do kind of a utilization study to understand how people are actually using the spaces and determine that even with this retrofit, they would be able to have enough space. So again, it goes back to like the quantity does not always equal the quality, and investing in kind of the quality of the spaces was improved. But I do think that there are a ton of like small scale retrofit ideas, and we've explored some of these with Renewable Cities and Hey Neighbour Collective. We had a retrofit design jam with architects and developers, but particularly around like outdoor spaces, there's a lot of multi-unit housing that have underused outdoor spaces or large lobbies that could be made to be more social as they're, say, doing an energy retrofit. So kind of like the LG Christmas apartments, like tacking on different projects together. And yeah, I do think that a lot of the things in the toolkit can be applied to existing buildings. I think the other piece that's important is the programming. I don't know, Michelle, if you want to talk about that.
Very quickly, just to note that a lot of our partners are scaling up programs in existing housing. And if folks look through the chat, we have shared the two previous webinars that we did with Happy Cities and United Way. And those are more focused on programming aspects that you can do in existing buildings. So absolutely go and check out those videos. And we have a ton of resources and a report also in there about ways to kind of improve spaces in existing buildings, specifically around aging in place and sociability. So tons of resources on our site. But Tara, for now, let's get another question lined up, maybe for one of the other panelists.
Yeah, there are a couple questions about the post-occupancy studies, asking how they're done, what questions you're asking, and who you're connecting with to do these.
Maybe I can take this one. In terms of the POEs, it kind of depends on the project. But specifically with Burnaby, what we did is we had a series of different things that we did. We had interviews with developers and property owners, the housing operators. We had engagement with residents, whether that's through surveys or through focus groups. And then we also conduct a building audit where we will go around the building. We have a proprietary tool that we use to kind of assess different spaces based on our social connection, social well-being criteria that we look at. So a combination of those things. We also interviewed like caretakers and property managers to get a level of like the day-to-day experiences for the post-occupancy evaluations or POEs. So it depends on the project, but there's a number of engagements that can happen per se. Yeah.
Yeah, and Melissa talked about some of the challenges with access to buildings. It is something that we have faced in pretty much every post-occupancy project we've done. So, if you are wanting to do these types of studies, my advice would be give yourself a lot of time to recognize that you will have a lot of back and forth with developers. We did find that it was effective for invitations to come directly from the city and particularly come from more senior folks in the city where possible who might have relationships with the developers already. But I will say, like, of the ones who did participate in Burnaby, yeah, they were really eager to share with us. They found the report that we sent them really helpful. And we kind of really set up the privacy and anonymity to say, we're not going to call out your building as saying like X developer, did this and this is going wrong in their building, but we're really looking at finding learnings that we can kind of aggregate and anonymize across multiple sites to say some of the general challenges and findings that we saw. I don't know, Melissa, if you want to add anything.
No, I think that's a great summary of it. One thing maybe I'll add is the idea with getting representation from different types of buildings was, from my team's experience with some of these buildings, depending on if it's mixed tenure and there's both strata and rental, the setup with amenity access can look quite different. Some of these buildings have amenities for all residents in the building. Sometimes amenities are segregated between strata and rental. Sometimes rentals in a separate building altogether, so that they don't have access to amenities in the main building. And so I will say, because we reached out to a lot of buildings, and we only got participation from a handful of them. It would be interesting to continue some of this research with some of the more obscure situations with amenity access, but yeah, it is really dependent on the developer and the property managers and how they've set up amenity access in the building.
Yeah, and there will be like, I think I saw something in the chat around supportive housing. So we have done studies in supportive housing, not at the city of Burnaby, but in other contexts. Obviously in that case, like we kind of have to adjust research and privacy and anonymity, just kind of recognizing that we need to come in with a trauma-informed approach to research to speak with vulnerable tenants. We've done work with Brightside as well, where a lot of lower income seniors who we're working with. So thinking about things like financial compensation for individual residents who are participating, or where we can actually provide value. Like with Brightside, we actually did in-person focus groups where we, brought snacks, and it was an opportunity for them to meet with each other, and we really made it like a fun social event for seniors as well. So just making sure that we're bringing value to people who are participating in the research. But yes, if anyone, I'll add one more thing, sorry. If anyone is interested around post-occupancy studies, Sherry and I would be happy to walk you through the methodology in detail and share some of our research considerations. So please reach out to us.
Hey, next question, Tara.
Okay, there's a question here for Elena. How did your team decide on the minimum percentage of family-friendly units and the minimum size of the family-friendly units? They say it's nice to see this initiative as unit sizes continually get smaller and smaller, but we shouldn't compromise that with tiny living areas.
Yeah, well, just as a summary, I guess I'll let everybody know in New West we have a few different policies that address the unit sizes and family-friendly units. For markets, so owned units, we want 40% or more to be 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom units, and at least 15% of these need to be 3-bedroom. And in rental projects, it's a little less. But we require a minimum of 35% to be 2- and 3-bedroom units, and at least 10% to be 3-bedroom. And we have different sizes. So 2 bedrooms, we require them to be about 750 square feet. And for 3 bedrooms, we require them to be just over 900 square feet. So we have that on our family-friendly housing page. I was not on the team that made this, so I don't want to speak for our social planning team. If you'd like to reach out to them, I included the email in one of the FAQ responses. It's our plan post at newwestcity.ca, and you can connect to learn more.
I don't know if Shireen, you want to add something around family-friendly units?
I was just going to try to raise my hand to do so. Yes, I'm going to quickly just drop in Port Moody's family-friendly unit policy into the chat. Hopefully you can see it. The way that, so originally prior to February or April of this, basically the spring of this year, Port Moody didn't necessarily have minimum unit sizes for the multifamily buildings, like studios up to 3-bedroom. But in our analysis for the family-friendly and age-friendly design guidelines, we realized that a lot of the units were exceeding what the BC Housing had as their minimum unit sizes. So I won't be able to read it out to you, but they are in our policy. But through direction we got from council, they wanted to have the minimum unit sizes built into policy. So they wanted to be built into the guidelines. But staff decided to recommend it be put into policy. So then that's what you see, because policy is mandatory, guidelines are voluntary. And yeah, so these guidelines for minimum unit sizes are there to ensure that we don't get too many small units and that they remain essentially as livable as possible from a space perspective. But we followed the direction of BC Housing. That was a very roundabout way of saying it, but BC Housing guidelines.
I think we're ready for the next question, Tara.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the tension between designing for well-being and community and also providing parking? Do you have any data or other research that illustrates this tension?
I can
Anyone want to
get us
try? There we go.
started. Um, I think it's an interesting one because as we said, like in the example, parking is a resource intensive thing to add into your building. And it is something that came up in our work with Burnaby as well, parking requirements. I won't go into the specifics since those results haven't gone to council, but looking at like bike parking requirements, car parking requirements, there is a tension. I will give you an example from a project in the city of Vancouver that we worked with, so Little Mountain Co-housing. They were actually able to negotiate parking reductions with the city of Vancouver through an agreement that they would be having kind of an internal car share system. And with the kind of like extra space that they had in their underground parking, and it also, saved them from having an additional floor of underground parking, which would have added significant cost to the project. They were able to add additional amenity spaces in their parkade. So they have a really soundproof music room and a workshop that are located underground. Um, Again, now they have maybe a few more cars than they anticipated, but they're kind of negotiating it together as a community, which obviously works in co-housing, but is more difficult in other types of housing. But there are lots of studies that look at kind of like the percentage of underutilized parking spaces in a lot of our buildings. So I do think it is interesting to look at your own jurisdiction to see like, can you do a study or a scan of like utilization? And I would encourage you to, speak with developers and architects who are often doing market studies, and they will tell you like, we think we can sell a unit without a space, or we think we can sell a unit with just one space. But I think if there are opportunities to be flexible around parking design, I think that's really beneficial. For Port Moody, we looked at kind of one of the examples is an enhanced bike parking spaces are eligible for parking reductions as part of the social wellbeing design guidelines. So you could be offering incentives to reduce parking or trade-offs to reduce parking to developers, and again, allowing developers to make those decisions based on their project needs.
Madeline, I'm just going to interject. The building you talked about that was the retrofit to the 60s seniors building. One of the reasons they had so much shared amenity space is because they had zero parking. Because it was a building that they knew was going to be 65 and over, and it's very transit oriented. Even in the 60s, they were able to get no parking, and so that huge amount of space, because they had no parking, meant they could, when doing the retrofit, add net new affordable homes for seniors into the existing building, which is unheard of. Tara, let's go to the next question.
Okay, we have a question from Mark. In the social design work, to what degree do digital technology solutions integrate to augment authentic human connection?
Madeline, I think this one I'm gonna out you, Mark. This is from Mark Venning, so I know you two have talked about this before.
Yeah, so Mark and I have actually been on a ISO committee for several years, looking at a new standard for smart multi-generational neighborhoods. And it does look at kind of like how technology integrates into facilitating, aging in place or social connection. Yeah, I will say like it is part of a lot of the property management companies that we talk to with the POEs do kind of integrate um, different platforms on like flexible booking systems for amenity spaces or you know, dedicated platforms for people to connect with neighbors. A lot of the co-housing groups have, ongoing channels where they're, have a buy nothing group for the building. So I do think that digital communication plays a key role in kind of like effectively managing these types of spaces. Um, I I won't speak too much to like on the aging in place side. There are a lot of really interesting emerging technologies that are looking at like safe life safety or other things within buildings. I know that like a lot of buildings that are doing energy retrofits are doing more monitoring in terms of like temperature control and energy use within buildings as well. So that's like feeding back into the data around decisions that they're making. So yeah, I do think it is playing a role, but I think we also find with a lot of our programming that the kind of like in person and the the champions that are existing in buildings are really crucial to build these connections. Michelle, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think through this kind of policy, local government policy that we're talking about, I think that's kind of out of the scope and purview. But it'd be an interesting topic for a whole separate webinar sometime, probably.
Yeah.
Tara, I think we have time for one more question before we close. And I know we didn't get to all of the questions, particularly some of the deeper questions around the very significant need to be building, well, to be preserving, but also building new, deeply affordable housing. Yeah, the downturn we are in is severely problematic. And I know that that's a huge conversation about how do we create policy that is guiding sociability while also not further eroding the feasibility for more deeply affordable non-market housing. So again, that could be a topic for a whole other conversation. And thank you to the folks who have raised that in the Q&A. But we'll ask one slightly easier, faster question, and then we will close. So Tara, off to you.
Okay, I think for the last question, we can move to multi-generational households. So have any of you done work with regards to making space for multi-generational households? How have you done this work, especially with many nonprofit housing providers being quite strict with the national occupancy standards and maybe some pushback from landlords for too many people in one unit?
Not an easy one. We've got crickets. So we are guiding for age-friendly and family-friendly. Multi-generational, I think, can be quite a tricky thing, right? Because again, some things are out of the purview of the kind of policies you're making. Because a city doesn't have any say over who eventually moves into these units, family composition and whatnot. And the national occupancy standards, don't always need to be enforced, but often are, which can really prevent intergenerational, multi-generational families from forming in multi-unit housing. I would say that I've seen some First Nations developers and Indigenous developers do really interesting work around making space for multi-generational families. Again, another webinar topic. We could fill a full 90 minutes or longer with that. I think that's a very, very challenging thing that we need to be addressing, and really is core to to helping people stay in the communities they want to be in. If you can do that and bring your family all together, and unusual, unorthodox family configurations too, I think we really need to be looking at that. So unfortunately, we are running out of time. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, and the chat is full of great comments too. So we have been recording this. We will put this up on our website in fairly short order, probably by end of next week, Tara. Is that fair? Yeah. And we will make sure that all of our presenters' slides are on that article and all of the resources that we've mentioned here and possibly some other ones. So with that, thank you to everyone. Thank you to our amazing speakers, and thank you for the work you're doing. This is really important work, and we will be, as we kind of wrap up this work with each of these cities, we will be kind of creating tools that other cities can use too, so that the pathway and the process for the next city is a little smoother, a little clearer. And of course, everybody will kind of customize it to their context, but the getting going should be a little bit smoother, hopefully. So please do reach out to myself and Madeline and Sherry from Neighbour and Happy Cities. We would love to work with other municipalities. That is fee-for-service work that we are very keen to do. And we're pretty good at helping kind of construct these projects. So do reach out. And on your way out, you will see that there is an evaluation survey. Please, please, please take 2 minutes to fill that out. It really means a lot to us and helps us make our webinars even stronger for next time. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to our other co-host, United Way BC, for being part of this and helping to get the word out. And I hope that all of you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Alrighty. I like the heart and the clapping functions. They're so friendly. Great.